Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being out here on a Friday morning. I'm told so long as we're all okay for going lunch, we have 3 hours for today's session, so I appreciate you all being with us. So yeah, welcome. We're really excited to share more about what we've learned so far in using text messages to survey our clients that have received limited housing services. And you'll hopefully find this presentation informative. Our partners today, you're up on deck here with us. We have Margaret Hagan and Susan Vincent. We'll go ahead and introduce ourselves in a minute. I'm Gerson Sorta with Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County. And, we're all part of this collaborative that's through funding from the California Access to Justice Commission. You'll see our partners on the screen. Not with us on up here today are our partners from Mental Health Advocacy Services and also from the Legal Aid Society of San Bernardino. With that, I'll hand it off to Margaret to start us off with intros.
Hi, everyone. I'm Margaret Hagan. I'm a lawyer by training. I run an innovation lab at Stanford Law School and D School, Design School, where we focus on access to justice innovation and trying to put the human first and make more people-centered court and legal aid systems. Susan?
I'm Susan Vincent. All right, here we go. I'm Susan Vincent. I'm the legal IT manager at Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. My role is relatively new at the organization, but I do our data, our case management services, our tech projects, our business process, and anything else they'll let me do.
And at NLSLA, I'm a supervising attorney. Oh, this is very loud. Where I direct our medical legal community partnership operations, including our countywide MLCPLA with the County of Los Angeles' Health Department, and also a most recent, our pilot with Kaiser Permanente. I'm also have had some opportunities to be engaged in research around MLCP. We're currently partnered with our partners at DHS to look at how social care integration is working and how legal services are impacted there. I'm up here today also because for NLS, I get to lead our work around this Texting for Outcomes initiative. So pleasure to be with you all today. So today we're going to give you a brief overview of our project and implementation. We're going to share some key considerations we had to make, such as how to ask the right questions and how to overcome some of the challenges we faced. We're going to show you some of the interesting insights we gained from our very early data, and finally suggest some practical steps you can take if you'd like to pursue something similar. So one of the most valuable lessons we learned very early on was the importance of patience and being flexible. So we initially planned to complete this project from implementation to development and data collection and analysis, all within 1 year. We were really optimistic. But we faced some unexpected challenges like you do, and we actually spent about 17 months in the initial implementation phase. And just recently, in late 2023, we finally moved into data collection and hope to have some more meaningful findings and analysis available later this year.
So I'll take this one and start off. So really this project was an interesting one for me because it's not just a tech project. We got this funding from the California Access to Justice Commission, and as part of having this finalized, we ended up partnering with not just Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles and Neighborhood Legal, but as we mentioned, Mental Health Advocacy Services, and then the Legal Aid folks in San Bernardino as well. And that partnership really did a couple of different things. One, it forced us to think really hard and have a lot of really interesting conversations about what data do we all have and what data do we all want. And that was a really tricky conversation because it's like, oh, we all have closing codes. They're all different. We all do housing work with a slightly different focus. Oh, we all track our housing work. We label what type of issue it is. Well, those issue types are slightly different. And I think that this is familiar to anyone who's done any kind of collaborative project with tech and data. But it was, I think very illuminating for the folks in those conversations to really think through what do we want to do? How many folks do we want to ask these questions of? how big of an overlap is there at all that we can even find that Venn diagram of space where we can ask these questions. And we really did build this project off of some excellent work that's been done in the past by folks in Texas and in Ohio and in Michigan, all over the country. We talked to them about the lessons that they had learned, and I think that really is one of the really beautiful parts of this conference and others is getting to iterate, getting to see what folks have done, and do something similar but different, and every time learn hopefully slightly different and new lessons from it. One of the things that we also really wanted to do, and especially having learned from those other organizations, was to make this as replicable as possible, even if that meant a smaller initial set of clients that were getting asked questions, even if it meant a smaller set of questions that were getting asked. But we wanted to be, something that other folks could take away, both the questions themselves and also the technology. And so we looked at the other options that folks had used, and we said, we really want to build this as much as possible within the case management system that we're all on already. And so this tool that we built out was entirely within LegalServer with the addition of Twilio. And so it's not something that you need to get a separate license for. You need to get the various modules, but you don't need a separate software entirely. You don't need to train your internal staff on an entirely different software. It really builds on expertise that's hopefully you already have or are developing in-house.
So yeah, as Susan mentioned, right, so just to really reinforce that point, LegalServer is not an evaluation built software, right? And there's other tools available, but as Susan mentioned, we really wanted to focus on that replicability, the convenience and the familiarity our staff had already, and also just the opportunities to expand into other spaces. We started with housing, as Susan mentioned, and I know that within our organizations, we're already exploring where are we going next? Is it, other subject matter areas? Is it by group, or how do we want to focus that? And, along the way, we also learned that when you use tools like LegalServer in really innovative ways, you get some really interesting and novel problems that pop up, and we'll talk more about, how we address those and overcame those.
Switch mics.
Oh, okay.
So this is what it looks like, kind of practically. I love flowcharts, probably too much. But when a case is closed in LegalServer, or at some point there's a closing date that gets entered into the case on LegalServer. We then have the LegalServer workflow module. That's one of the key components of this stack. And it's running to evaluate the date fields in that case, and it runs its specified times. I think it's once an hour, but that may be updated or changed at any point. And it's looking to see, does the case meet the criteria for the survey? So is there a date in the date closed? Is it, in our situation, 28 days since that date? And then is it the particular type of case that we wanted to send these surveys out to? So is it a housing case? Have we indicated that it's a safe to text phone number? Is there DV indicated or not? That might be a reason not to send this out. Does the client speak either English or Spanish, which are the languages that we have available in this particular project? And so a couple other things like that. If you were in the automation workshop yesterday, we talked a little bit more about workflows, and if you want to know more, then I know Michael is in the back with LegalServer, and you can pester him. But then once that evaluates and says, yes, this is a case that needs that text message survey to be sent out, then a LegalServer guided navigation survey is sent out. Again, hopefully familiar terms to those of you who are on LegalServer. The questions are asked one at a time. There's not kind of delay in between the questions. It's question and answer, and as soon as the answer comes in, the next question is sent. You can do branching, so if they answer this way, then ask this question next. If they answer the other way, then ask a different question. Those responses that come in are evaluated using LegalServer's NLU, or Natural Language Understanding module, again, another component of this project, to say if you typed out the letters ONE, that means one. We know that that's going to translate into the numeral 1 in that response. And we found out that even though this is technically an English language NLU processing engine, that it did understand enough Spanish to translate or to understand the integers 1 through 5 and yes, no, and the various responses that might come in a Spanish language response. And so we were able to kind of use that, hack it a little bit, and use both English and Spanish text messages. That data are then recorded in the legal server on case field, so 1 case field per question. And then that data has been shared out with Margaret's team via the legal server reports API. And so it's really convenient to have all of that in one place on the case and to be able to pull that out via reports and other, again, very familiar tools for legal server folks. And I am next again, so this is great. So one of the things that we had to do up front was really to develop these client surveys. And we talked to a lot of different folks who have done evaluation in the legal aid world, who have done client surveys, client feedback, trying to assess impact of legal aid work. And really, Margaret and her team were incredibly helpful with kind of guiding the conversation. But I'll say with that, a lot of this really comes down to what do you want to learn? And that's something that no consultant can tell you what you should do. You kind of have to decide that among yourselves, whether that's within an organization or across organizations. And one thing that I've talked about was kind of informally with a lot of folks in this conference is that there's really 2 approaches to asking questions. One is to look at the data you already have and find the gaps and try to fill those with very specific targeted questions. And another approach is to ask more broad questions. And then once you get the responses back to that, then you can start having an internal dialogue about, well, what does this mean? And why is it different for this case type versus that case type? And look at the demographics and look at the cases. It may not be as immediately informative to your work, but it is incredibly beneficial to have a very clear, easily understandable, or at least easily presentable metric. And then again, to have that conversation ongoing with your teams about, okay, now what? What does this mean? And what do we do with this now?
And I think one of the values of the collaborative we had is, the diversity that exists within our organizations. So some of us are located in Los Angeles County, others in a totally different county. Within our organizations, there's so much diversity in terms of our budgets, even our missions, how extensively we've embraced evaluation already. And all of that, right, shaped the discussions we had as we thought through these questions and thought about the workflows and how it would impact our staff. And I think our hope is by having had those conversations in a diverse group, the product is also going to be something that's more replicable. And we'll get, preview of coming attractions. We'll talk about, some recommendations. I think for me, like one of the key things is if you are embarking on this type of work is looking at who are those partners you can work with, because there is so much value in that shared expertise, but also in the product that is created as a result.
I will just say on that very beginning, the beginning phase of the project and defining the scope, we did these digital whiteboarding sessions where everyone was on, and we looked at all the past kind of surveys that self-help centers had run, that brief advice clinics, that legal aid groups and researchers who studied, all the different things they tried to measure. And we just talked about what are all the things we could measure, and then of these, let's make our best guess about what's most valuable for service design, for policy making, for kind of ongoing metrics, knowing we cannot know everything and we cannot use a text message survey to accomplish all the kinds of knowledge building that we might want. So you have to make some amount of choice, but it's good to do that in an intentional way, I think, and to build off of the past survey instruments. There's just so many survey instruments that have been built out in the past 20 years, either that are handed to people as they exit a self-help center or emailed to people after a legal aid service. So there's so much to build from, but we just wanted to do it very intentionally.
And it was interesting too, the folks that were represented in that meeting. Like, I'm not an executive director. I don't have the same need for external communication or that kind of side of things of presenting to funders or legislators. I want to know about like the nitty gritty of how the stuff works. But we had executive directors on the panel and they have a different perspective and they want the nitty gritty too. But they also want to be able to say, yes, this matters. Yes, you should fund us and we should be able to keep doing it. And so having those diverse perspectives was challenging, but also I think really beneficial. Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit before, so I'm not going to repeat myself too much. But you know what we ended up doing after all of this conversation back and forth and around and around was really narrowing down to, you know, we're going to talk about housing only. We're going to talk about cases closed A and B only, limited services for now. We're going to ask the questions in English and Spanish only for now. And partly because of limitations with the legal server tools and also just for clarity across organizations, we limited the responses to really two main types. One is a scale of 1 to 5, and the other is yes, no. Those were, you know, very easy to compare again across organizations, relatively straightforward for folks to understand, did not require a ton of the natural language processing to convert into something more standardized. And then we did have one free text at the end, just asking how we can improve our services. So for those folks who opted in, said, yes, we want to take the survey, made it all the way through to the end. They did have the opportunity to provide some more open-ended feedback. But that was the only time that we had that kind of open-ended question, both for, you know, again, consistency across organizations and also to help reduce any confidentiality concerns of sharing that with third parties who are doing the evaluation, and you know, to not have to have someone like me or Gerson go through and manually try and redact anything that might come in and be identifiable.
Yeah, I think you can see an example. We couldn't show you very cleanly the multiple branches of the question types that people either with an eviction issue that were being messaged or a reasonable accommodation or a habitability issue. Because of that branching logic, there's usually somewhere around 10 questions in the total interaction. We start off reaffirming consent. So even if face-to-face or with their service provider, they had been given a kind of an initial consent to accept receiving a text message survey, we reiterate that when the survey actually is sent out. And then for those who do give consent, we have the kind of more substantive feedback questions. Like Susan said, most of these are either as a yes, no, or on a scale of 1 to 5, what number would you give? There's the one free text at the end, but we really tried to test both for the clarity of the questions and the succinctness of the overall flow. So in addition to learning from past text message survey projects from Cleveland, Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, and Michigan Legal Help, and what they learned about how to design a tight and efficient survey flow for text message. We also did phone calls with clients to test out the script, just voice to voice on the phone, to also understand if when we ask these questions, yes, no, 1 to 5 with these phrasings, what do they understand it to actually mean? And when we get a response from them, does it correspond to what we're expecting? So we did user testing for that kind of understanding and that the questions we asked were likely to be producing the responses that we were interpreting correctly. Yeah, so like Susan said, it ends with a question about, do you have any ideas about how to make the legal services better? And then the final message, I think, is a request to contact for follow-up. Do you consent or would you be interested if particularly someone from the research team, as we find puzzles or want to know more about why we see these yes-no patterns or 1 to 5 questions, we could contact them for a 30-minute call afterwards. So we get that kind of next level of research consent. Yeah.
And I think a really important thing that just to also reiterate in terms of the impact on our staff on the ground, right? So there's a lot of these questions that are going out and it's all being automated. Staff essentially are answering a couple of questions, one of which they already asked. So they're asking a patient or a client if they consent to receiving text messages, and that's part of our normal intake process. And then at closing, they're also entering the type of case that it is. So whether it's a housing eviction or habitability issue or reasonable accommodation or some other type of category that we couldn't really glean from the problem code. So that was something that we needed to manually enter. And we also added another category, right? We know there are some clients who have particularly traumatic experiences in their case, or there's something else going on that, it wouldn't be appropriate for that person to receive a survey. There's also an option for that. And we've made it clear in the messaging in Legal Server and also through training that, that's not, this person might leave a bad review or note a bad experience. It's more, we don't want to somehow burden or traumatize or harm the client through the survey itself. So it is a fairly narrow exception that also exists.
I think that it is important to note that we did put that in after a lot of conversation, because there was kind of back and forth of, should we allow our staff to essentially opt out of this at all? Is that going to corrupt the data in some way? And we said, well, let's just we'll test it. We'll give them the option and we'll require that they say why, say why they're opting out. And if we see that they're abusing that, then we'll take it away. But we found that staff generally are using it pretty well. They're using it because maybe a case was not closed in Legal Server timely, and so it's been, much longer than 28 days, and so it wouldn't be appropriate or within the scope. Some of those folks are already being evaluated or filling out surveys elsewhere, and they didn't want to burden the client. Some of it is that kind of safety issue. And so I think that was something that we really actually found a lot more valuable than we expected.
Like Gerson said, we wish we had a lot more data and that this had been executed months, if not years ago, so we could have a final report. We're not there yet. The data is still early. So we would love to share with you some information, less about the substantive outcomes. We just don't have enough data to say things conclusively yet, though that will come later. Right now, today, we'd love to talk about who is responding. What has our response rate been for the text message-based survey? And who can we see of who is responding? Are we getting a representative responding group? So let's look at the response rate first. I don't know, before I show you our response rate, does anyone guess? Or have you run surveys? Anyone want to shout out when you send out a survey via email, via text, in person?
Snail mail.
How many people actually, through snail mail? How many people actually respond? Like, what's your percentage? Just shout it out. 10 to 12%. Mm-hmm. Do you feel good about that? Do you feel bad about that? And do you know the representativeness of the people who do? Like, do you feel like you're getting a good demographic representativeness of the kind of base clients you were contacting? So 10 to 12%? Anyone getting higher than 10 to 12% response rate or much lower? Like, because it's being, So 10 to 12% as one kind of response rate. Anyone else have different rates off the top of your head? Thank you, Jane. Well, our current response rate, this isn't updated to this week, but as of last week, the text message survey had been sent out, that kind of initial reconsent. Would you accept or would you agree to having a text message survey? When we send that text message, we've sent it out to 3,004 people. 927 people have said yes. 98 people have said no, they've declined consent, and 1,979 do not respond. So that response rate, that positive response rate, is around 30% now. So I think we're happy with it. I mean, we love 100%, but 30% is in the right direction. 3%, 98 amounts to 3% refuse, and 60% non-response rate. So as we see that, we want to know, all right, so we're getting a 30% response rate. That's better than we'd get probably from email or snail mail. So going in the right direction. But is that representative of the client population of who we want to know about? So that gets us to the demographics. And because we have the survey information matched with non-PII information from the Legal Server case management system, right, Susan? That's being sent, we can see kind of a little bit more about who's responding. So the first one is about issue areas. Like we had mentioned about in the question section, The text message survey is being sent out to people with 3 kind of issue types, case types: eviction, habitability. It's cut off on my reasonable accommodation. So we see there's just more on the left-hand chart. You can see the possible respondents of all the people who the text message survey is being sent to, what their profile of issue areas, and then you can kind of see the proportionality of the actual respondents, the people who are saying yes and participating. It matches up. So most of the responses are coming from those with eviction issues. That's also kind of the dominant client group who's being texted about. When it comes to age, we see across age groups, it's generally representative that the people, the groups that are being sent are generally corresponding to the ones who are responding. We have slightly higher engagement with those in the 45-year-old to 59 category. For gender groups, we generally see representative rates among women compared to men. Slightly higher proportion of women are responding than men are. And again, we can do follow-up surveys to try to figure out if we see discrepancies, but right now we just see the numbers, so we don't have a lot of the why. When it comes to racial and ethnic groups, we see among those who respond, slightly overrepresentation of white communities and Black African American communities responding, and we see an underrepresentation of Hispanic or Latino clients responding. We're just comparing those slices of the pie from those who we contact to those who respond. And the final kind of slice and dice is economic status. So across different economic groups, either measured by poverty brackets or their AMI category, we see people in the lowest income bracket, below 100%, underrepresented in the responses. And then if we slice it by AMI, we see people in the very low AMI category, like under 30% of the AMI, significantly underrepresented in who's responding. And we see people over 100% of AMI significantly overrepresented in the sample. So that's really good to know. As we get more substantive responses, we can say more clearly who we're actually talking about when we talk about the responses that we're getting, and also then think about strategies. If we know certain groups aren't responding to the text message survey, are there other strategies that we can get their voices heard, and not overrepresenting kind of what we're overgeneralizing what we're able to learn from the text message surveys. I'll stop there.
I had a comment or a question.
Hello, my name is Monique Keels for Community Legal Services. We operate just slightly different, very interested in like the text message modeling. We use an interactive voice survey after phone calls. And so we probably maybe on average have like 1,500 responses a year, but we don't break it down on this level. Like we break it down based on like age and things like that, just because of like our grant funding requirements and counties of residence and things like that. But this is really, really instructive and helpful in breaking it down, like things like AMI.
Yeah, and as we get, the great thing about this kind of clean, coordinated data collection is as we do get more substantive responses about whether it's housing stability, people who actually then file documents, other kinds of outcomes, we can slice by, if we can see trends, if there's both like a racial, gender, economic status persona that emerges who is not able or who is able, or who has different experiences, we can start to see those patterns.
I think goes right into kind of what do we do? What do we do with the data that we're getting? Gerson, did you want to start that off?
Yeah, and I'll say to that point too, like, I think it'd be really interesting. So we send our surveys 30 days after a case is closed. And it'd be really interesting if we had that sort of technology, like what does it look like for a client the day the service is closed versus 30 days or 60 days out? So having some sort of baseline would be really, really interesting. But yeah, so we're in the early stages of data collection, and we have 3 big kind of observations we'd like to share with you. First is that it's okay if the initial data just raises more questions than answers. Maybe there isn't a clear pattern yet, or maybe you're even getting some seemingly contradictory findings. And second is we should really stop and look at the questions we're asking, and are the clients actually responding in the way we expected them to? Are the questions truly getting at the information we were hoping to get? Or do we need additional information to really clarify or offer more context into what those responses are? And then third is just, calling back to the initial lesson of patience, acknowledging the fact that we need more time, I think was very important, and our funder was also very respectful and responsive to that need. But having more time is really going to allow us then to dive into those nuances and then ultimately, hopefully have some more valid and replicable conclusions at the end.
Yeah, I think that one of the challenging things is, when you start a big project and you're like, oh, you're going to have like a clean data point that we can put in all our materials, and we're going to communicate the impact of our services. But really recognizing that, people's lives are more complicated than that. Our work is more complicated than that. And that, especially with these types of services, the kind of counsel and advice and brief services, that even if your work does as much as it can possibly do, even if that person is able to take that advice or that brief service and run with it and get a good legal outcome, that work is not necessarily
members of your staff that are drafting these case descriptions and posting cases.
We've got some crossover.
What kind of training, what kind of ongoing training do you provide your staff in order to ensure that they're
Is the microphone
adequately kind of trained up to do this successfully?
Oh, we've got some, we've got some
Spirits of
microphones on the same
conferences
channel.
past.
Okay, I think we mostly resolved the ghost in the machine. I joke with my Lapla folks that I'm the ghost in the machine because I've got like 60 hours of training videos on our IT site. I'm gonna live there forever. But no, one of the things that we're seeing is that even when people respond with very positive feedback about these brief services, and even when they're able to take them and run with them, that aid is not necessarily transformative, even if it's helpful. They're still in poverty. They're still in very vulnerable housing situations, even if they're able to keep their housing. And so I think that that's one of those things that, as legal aid providers, we have to be comfortable with some level of nuance. The data is helpful. The data can strengthen your communications, but it's not going to erase or eliminate any of that complexity. If anything, it's going to highlight it. And you need to be willing to engage with it.
And I think the fact that we're able to, in real time, look at the data and sort of what the general trends are, we can also pivot, right, as we're going through this evaluation and add more information. So one of the things, as Susan was mentioning, and with some of the things not adding up, we often all get cases where, despite our best efforts, the client just isn't entitled to what they're asking for or what they'd like. And that's, for example, a data point we're not currently collecting. And there's other pieces like that might help us better tell the story and make it all make sense. So I'd say, let's look to wrap up by talking about some of the challenges and some opportunities that we encountered. And I'll hand it to you, Susan.
Sure, why not? So I think that, one of the kind of going into that tech challenges and opportunities, there were definitely some delays in the software and getting everything set up the way that it needed to be. Part of that was on our end. We didn't, spell out how much or exact the type of test.
A little bit as far as what the launch
Is it this
events
mic?
look like and kind of the efforts that you've engaged in. But I do want to spend a little more time on that as far as what does that look like on a regular basis. So my understanding was that
You want to take that question?
Jenna, you've used the
Yeah,
business
I'll take
card
that question.
for launch events. I know Laura
Why not? I do
launched
open Q&As
trainings
every couple of weeks.
and kind
I
of reminding folks to use that website.
don't know
That
if you can see which
both-
line it is and mute it, but a lot of that those delays were, we didn't necessarily have a perfect idea up front about what the tools exactly would need to do so that we could then talk to our tech developers, legal server, and say, hey, as you're developing this, please make sure it can do exactly these 5 things. We were building it out as we went. And so then even as we were in conversation with them, they said, hey, we built it out to your specifications. At that point, we started to have questions that we needed to put into the system. And then, oh, wait, as we're building this out, now we're running into another limitation or another complexity that we then need to adapt the questions to. And so really, as a project manager, you want to kind of be efficient with your time and run like 3 different tracks at once of like we're building the tech at the same time as we're developing the questions at the same time as we're getting buy-in. But sometimes those things are a lot more interdependent than you think. And so sometimes they all have to be on that same critical path. And you have to understand that a delay in one thing or a change in one aspect is going to cause a change in something else. And so really having that flexibility either built into your original plan or being really actively involved with your funders and other folks who are participating in the project to be understanding if and as there are changes to your initial timeline. Same thing with multi-language support. We really wanted, this was really important for us to be able to get this out in Spanish, being in Los Angeles County. It's kind of hard to say that you're being engaged with your client community and you don't have Spanish options. But the tech wasn't kind of immediately available for that. And so we said, can we build it out anyway? Can we figure out a way to make this work? And fortunately, we were able to do that. But again, translation takes time. Getting stuff tested in multiple languages takes time. And so that definitely contributed to the timeline that you saw at the very beginning.
So one of the things that all of us, at least the legal partners, agreed on or can agree on is that we really want to embrace this culture of evaluation within our programs. And I think looking at sort of 3 main pillars of that. First is looking at assessing how we've used evaluation in the past. Did we follow through? Were we consistent? What is our staff and organizational experience with evaluation? And then secondly, it's really critical to involve our staff as active collaborators, not just here's a memo or an announcement that says we're going to be doing X, Y, and Z, but do they understand and agree with the vision of evaluation itself? Like, do they share the same purpose in what they're doing, or is it something that might seem like a challenge to their work and like maybe a potential negative thing? And then with that, how can we solicit and engage them and get their input and have it be meaningful? And then finally, the evaluation should really hold an important place within our organization. So how does it inform our decisions and our actions? How do we communicate the information once we have it and disseminate it, within decision makers? And then, how is it an integrated part of our strategic planning and decision making, right? So if our staff on the ground, all of us putting this together are going to spend all this time, and most importantly, our clients are spending all this time to share with us their experiences within our organizations. It's important that that be valued by actually being incorporated meaningfully into the work that we do. So with that, we'll segue and ask, how can texting for justice work for you all? We built upon some scoping questions and a template that Susan and Luigi Bai of Lone Star Legal Aid and Lauren Gilbride of the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, they prepared for last year's Equal Justice Conference. We built upon that, and you'll see that in the conference materials. And we hope that you'll find the scoping template helpful as you think about, the scope of a project. Where does the funding come for it? What are the strategic partnerships you might have as part of it? Who do you need on your team within your organization, and what are their roles? And then also, what are the different tech options? Those are a lot of the key questions that, kept us up at night during those first 17 months. And we're hoping you'll find that helpful. But, we'd like to transition to questions, and we have a few questions of our own to you as we look to discuss, how this can be operationalized within your organizations.
So I am seeing one question in the chat. I've responded to one, which is, the materials will be available from LSC, and we've got a QR code at the end. We do have about a 30% response rate, as we talked about already. We would love to expand to more languages. That's a question of, to the extent that we can build that out in Legal Server. There's a lot more complexity as soon as you start introducing kind of different characters into the mix, but hopefully that will happen at some point. What is the cost differential between mailing and texting? Pennies for texting versus you're getting up to $1 for mailing, including postage and paper and all of that. Margaret, did we know how many folks complete the entire survey? Did we pull that out?
No, I can do that. I can do that because of the different branching. I would say that from like a gut level, less than 50% make it all the way through to the final question. But I need to see for the different pathways, kind of the percentage rates of completion. Yeah.
And that is something that, as you know, looking at the narrative responses that people shared, I remember one comment stood out to me saying, I didn't expect that the text messages would keep on coming. And I think it's something that we can do better in terms of informing people and helping them understand, you know, what is the scope of the survey and what is it actually going to involve. It's more than just one question, but hopefully not something that's so burdensome that, you know, would be sort of an onerous task.
Gerson, are your clients at NLS told ahead of time that they're going to be receiving the text message survey specifically?
It's not something we've incorporated into like a formal practice. I think many of our, we encourage our staff to let clients know that, you know, they may receive a text message survey, but it's not necessarily always happening. How about you all at LAFLA?
Yeah, I don't think that we're telling them often at all that they're getting the text message survey. They do opt in again to indicate that it's okay to text them about their case, and we take that as sufficient consent to do that initial text message of the survey saying, are you willing to do a text message survey? And again, if they ignore it or say no, then we don't keep texting them and harassing them. But if they say yes, then they get those questions. See one in the back.
So I thought you mentioned the step of doing basically live surveying with the questions that you intended to ask. I thought that was an interesting thing that we did. I don't think we did at all with our texting surveys initially. Did you find that you needed to reword or change questions significantly, or did people mostly seem to understand what you were getting at?
We heard, yes, that the questions that especially we had borrowed, I mean, clearly other people had honed these. We did not have to do any major editing or drafting. We had tried to be as plain language and learn from best practices, and I think that led us right. What those interviews did tell us was, I think, how important the timing, especially of a housing survey, is. That, you know, after you receive brief advice, whether you're at the problem brewing stage or an actual lawsuit stage, you don't actually, like, your responses to the same survey questions might be very different in the week after, 30 days after, 60 days after, as there's either negotiation or gamesmanship with landlord, or the situation you presented to the legal aid group is now completely different than the situation you're dealing with. So it made us very aware that the point in time that the survey came was not the end of the story, and that maybe thinking about a more longitudinal, multi-point plan in a future iteration would be really important. But yeah, I think the plain language of a text message question, a yes, no, 1 to 5, people did not struggle with that kind of model of questioning. It just made us realize how much is going on underneath the surface, under the number or the yes or no.
Some questions about the legal server and kind of the technical side of it. This is, again, like, as I mentioned, it's built using workflows. So the workflow kicks off a guided navigation dialogue, which is sent to the clients via text message. And then, again, those responses are using the NLU module to process it. I'm sure that if we haven't done it already, it'll be a topic of a call that'll be recorded in non-legal servers integrations module. And so as far as maintaining that and having the staff internally to maintain or build something out like this, if you've got a legal server admin who has that as their at least most time job, if not full-time job, and enjoys it, then that's something that you would be able to update and maintain. It does not require specialized coding or other language skills. And so hopefully, again, that this actually will be something that is pretty easy or straightforward to replicate.
I see another question that asks about other survey options that we use post-service. At least at Neighborhood Legal Services, that isn't done very consistently. There are some very program-specific type of evaluation that happens. So I mentioned I oversee our medical legal community partnerships, and with partnership with our healthcare systems, we do get some evaluation that happens that looks at both impact on health and certain metrics like inpatient utilization or emergency department utilization and sort of scope of service. Some of our other teams like self-help might have very individualized surveys, but there isn't anything systematically that we do. One of our other partners, and he was the inspiration of our sort of culture evaluation slide, and that's very much ingrained in what they do for every one of their clients. So staff is very much aware and sort of bought into that model, and I think clients are very used to receiving surveys. So one of the things we're very interested in looking at is, are the response rates, if we kind of dove in by organization, are they different for them because they already sort of have systems and a culture of that versus other orgs where we're not, doing that as frequently.
One question in the back, and then I think we're at time.
Does that mean?
Good. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sort of wondering about your 30-minute phone calls that you mentioned. I'm wondering, like, one, did you provide compensation for that time? And then two, just sort of like in general, how did you go about determining like what's an appropriate amount of time to ask from people, like in terms, because they're kind of working for you at that point, providing you with feedback. And I'm just sort of like, I do user research, and so I'm just sort of, it's always like tricky to be, what's that line in terms of like, am I asking somebody too much for free, and like, how do we go about compensating people for their time?
Yep. So the only qualitative interviews we've done have been the pre-testing. So yes, we compensate. Our general rate is, if we're speaking to someone, whether Zoom or in person, for around the 30-minute point, to give a $40 digital gift card. We have university resources that, like, when something is classified as a research activity, we can make money flow for that from the law school budget. So we've been compensating with digital gift cards. Our general price point right now is $40 gift card for half hour to kind of spill over. If it's more around the 10 to 15, then a $10 gift card, because we know that 30 minutes is a lot of time. And I think as we decide what we want to follow up on and which type of people we want to recruit for kind of more understanding qualitative conversations, we'll probably be doing a similar, like, aiming. I think you can get a lot of information even at the 15-minute, but 30 minutes just gives more time to really hear their full story. So, yeah.
I really appreciate all the questions. I think we actually have till 11 or 12:15, so we might have a few more minutes. So let's see, would you be able to share a list of the actual survey questions? I think one of the things that we're hoping to do at the end of our work is to have some kind of public document or toolkit or something that can be replicable. And I think that will definitely include some of our legal server work, and I could see our questions being included there too. So definitely something we hope to do in the future. And then the question was also, did the system record if the phone of the client was disconnected? If so, did you follow up with an email survey? That's a really great point. And as of right now, I don't know that we can tell if the text bounces back or if we would even be notified.
To follow up on, particularly if and as we start doing longer time frames. Right now we're doing 28 days after the case closes, which to another question on there about, I turned this one off. There we go. Okay. There we go. Right. There we go. So we are sending this out 28 days after the case is closed. And so we are operating under the assumption that the demographics of the client haven't changed significantly in that time. We're operating under the assumption that the phone number hasn't likely changed in that time, although having done client work, that's I know that's not a 100% assumption. And so we also picked 28 days specifically because we wanted to primarily text folks during the week, Monday through Friday, because that's when they expect to hear from us. And we assumed that our advocates are closing most of their cases Monday through Friday because that's when they're primarily working. And so instead of doing it at a 30-day or kind of a non-7-day increment, we hoped that would, lend a little bit more be in alignment with what the clients expect from us and when they expect to hear from us. And so we were able to, again, work with Legal Server to say, only send out the text messages between certain hours of the day. We had a lot of back and forth about how late is too late. But I think we ended up saying afternoons between 1 p.m. and 8 p.m. or something like that would be the hours to send those messages out.
One of the questions is, will you be able to add the court self-help centers to the texting evaluation in the future? For us, the last step is expanding to different programs is something we would very much consider and try to think through. I think that self-help is a little trickier, especially when the data is limited in the region. But I think we would need to kind of manage some more intake workflows, but the technology for that thing is really, to a little bit further.
I think, as has been mentioned, we're still kind of in that iteration phase of the survey questions and response, but moving towards standardized follow-up surveys would be great. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I did a literature review of all these amazing self-help surveys and legal aid surveys. And we're all asking around the similar kinds of questions and topics, but there's nothing standard. But the more that, whether it's in the LA region or even nationally, we can agree upon relatively standardized outcome surveys, it just becomes so much easier and more wonderful to cooperate, compare, and set benchmarks. So I think with this initial cohort, it's been a great way to kind of stress test coordinate across organizations. And if we can get the questions right for housing, brief advice, and case types, hopefully we can expand to get more people on the standard question set and then expand to other case types.
There's a question about the. Yeah.
One of the, just on the prior point,
Oh.
the prior,
There's the one.
At one of the prior sessions yesterday, like one of the questions was, in terms of like sustainability, this was in the innovations presentation, sustainability and, how, there are a lot of really bright and motivated people here in the room and at this conference, right? But how do we continue this message to others within leadership, within our organizations, or even organizations that are not represented here? And I think that's something that I would love to see some kind of working group that's really focused around evaluation. And as Margaret mentioned, right, how do we standardize it? But really, like, in hearing that there are others who are using like the phone messages or other snail mail or other opportunities for texting and for evaluation, like how do we build upon that, right? And our hope is that maybe this can be a starting point, like others have done as well before, but having the communication would be amazing. And then, sharing those results to really prove our case for why legal services are so important.
I'll answer there's a question in the app about, are the answers aggregated by legal server, i.e. are the responses confidential? And this is both a feature and a limitation of the methodology that we decided to go with, which is that the responses to the text message are tied to the case that kind of triggered the survey to be sent out. And so we don't share identifying information with our research partners or with our other folks on the grant. But if we were, internally to want to say, okay, who exactly gave us this feedback, we would know. We would have that ability to tie in the feedback, the responses to the specific clients, to the specific advocates who worked on the case. And again, that's for better and worse. I think that the benefit of that is that we are getting much more actionable data. We can go in and see patterns. We can say, okay, why is this advocate consistently overperforming? What are they doing right? Or we can say, why is this advocate consistently underperforming? What's going wrong? Again, that's part of the culture of evaluation. That's not something you want to surprise your staff with, but it is an important data point to be able to look at your services and see what's working, what's not. But again, on the other hand, it does mean that those responses are not anonymized at the point that they come to us as a legal service provider. And so to the extent that there is concern about folks not feeling comfortable or safe to provide more honest feedback, then that certainly is a limitation.
Just a couple of questions remaining. So can you use this to see if people need more help in the process? Whether someone needs additional legal help is not a question we ask, and I don't know that we monitor the text messages in a way that we'd be able to identify that. I know within NLS, at least, given the volume of surveys that are being sent out, it would definitely be a capacity concern, whether we could meaningfully respond to someone if we're affirmatively putting out there that there's additional help that's available in response to this text message survey. But I know that one of the things we did discuss is, what happens if after the survey closes, we get additional responses, and how that messaging could be. And I think we had considered, and I don't recall if we ended up putting in, having some, boilerplate language that says, if you need additional legal help, contact, X organization, our website or our phone number, whatever that is. But it is something that, in the future, with the staffing, behind it, I think it could be a really great tool to assess, you're telling us that your habitability issue, the housing conditions are still in disrepair 30 days later. Do you want to reconnect with an advocate? We'd love the opportunity to do that.
I think that may have been something that we discussed, Gerson, before you came on to the project. We did spend a couple of sessions with our team talking about, like, we want to be able to provide that direct reconnection to services, but we also don't want to offer or promise more than we can give. And that was the really, practical weighing point of, like, we want to re-engage folks, but honestly, the best way to re-engage them at the A and B level is to send them back through our main intake. I can imagine if it were a more extended service case, we would want to do something else, flag it for the advocate that was already on the case, that already has that investment. But I think that was really, again, like you said, very much a capacity determination that we can't offer more than we can give without losing the client's trust.
I'll add one thing. So as we were designing the survey flows for the different case types, and I think we borrowed this directly from Cleveland's model of follow-up texting, is we planned out, all right, after receiving type A or type B help for an unlawful detainer, what are the expected, like, really clear actions that we would expect a person to take? And then let's just ask them, did you take this step? Did you take that step? So we can hopefully start to see where the breakdowns are, where the type of help they're just not able to complete. If we can see a kind of percentage rate of people who do get advice that they are happy with, but then are not able to complete this step or that step, we can find hopefully those breaking points and then think about service redesigns, informational guides, other things to kind of fix those breakdowns that the text message survey might identify.
There's one question about, have you run into any issues sending the same person multiple surveys? For example, if one client has multiple housing cases closed in LegalServer in a short period, that is a possibility with the tech we have set up. It's not a client-based system, it is a case-based system. And so that is one of the things that we've actually at LAFLA told our advocates who do housing cases, is that if you're closing a bunch of these at once, that's an appropriate place to use that don't send the survey option that we've given them, and just say we closed 3 cases, we only send out that survey in one of them, and that's an appropriate thing to do. It doesn't solve for every case, especially if you've got multiple work groups, multiple offices who are potentially helping the same person. But that, that is something that as we get more data, it might be interesting to look at the reports and say, did we have multiple attempts to contact the same phone number over a short period of time? And if so, which case did the responses go into?
Any key takeaways from my co-panelists that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Well, I would say that surprisingly, working with multiple organizations, I think you touched on that at the front, Gerson, alignment is clearly a huge thing, but it's actually been a real joy to work across organizations and to build that regional network. And the bureaucracy and other things have not been that bad, but I think there's some leaders, especially if you have great tech or data capacity in one organization, all these other organizations are benefiting in the region. Just to see how quickly like that kind of cohort model can bring all these different organizations up to a new level of capacity. It's been really great to see that model play out.
I think for me, I've seen a lot of potential funding opportunities, at least in the medical legal community partnership space, that really focus on data-driven solutions. And I think across the work, but especially for working with health systems, having data that proves what we know all along, that we impact our clients, is really fruitful. So it's one of the things that, for me, has been personally very motivating in this work, is knowing that it's directly influencing the opportunities that exist for our work in the future.
I think for me, the one of the nice takeaways is that if you can get funding and buy-in for something to build the minimum viable product, to say, okay, we're not doing all of the text messaging, we're not doing the best data collection with the best everything, we're doing something that works. If you can get that to live, if you can get it to working, then you can iterate and build out. We're already using this technology, this model to do surveys in other cases and other grants. And so we wouldn't have had that technology or that capacity if we hadn't had this initial grant, this initial setup that was able to push all the way through to completion.
And speaking of surveys, the LSE ITC conference survey, let's see if we can beat our 30% response rate we have here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you all.